This is a Jawa 250cc two-stroke motorbike from 1962. The last time this legendary automotive machinery was fired up was 62 years ago. As you can see, the bike was abandoned in what looks like an open truck yard, exposed to rain and sun for who knows how long. But somehow the damage doesn't seem too excessive. The engine is clearly not running, and several components on the bike have been riddled with rust and corrosion. Nonetheless, there were some tiny positives. The key was miraculously found on site, and the tires were still moving, but obviously they couldn't travel far. So the restorer called in a hauling van. The first stop was an auto wash, where the bike got a thorough wash. Once this was done, the restorer wheeled it back into the van, and off they went to the workshop. By now, the water from the auto wash had completely dried off, allowing us to see the extensive rust on the fuel tank, and it certainly didn't look good. I mean, the restorer knew it was rusted all along, but he must have been hoping for some respite after the first round of washing. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case here, and the situation is actually worse than you think because, as you can imagine, sourcing for spare parts for a 62-year-old bike is not the easiest job in the world. Anyway, the restorer decided to keep that on the side for now and focus on the disassembly process, starting from the headlight to the speedometer and even the keyway. Once these two elements were detached, attention switched quickly to the seat and then the engine. This part of the bike is quite delicate because it's surrounded by several components, all installed in close proximity to themselves, so the restorer needed to be extra careful. Everything seemed to be going pretty well until the restorer spotted something unusual. One of the components attached to the frame had been badly damaged by rust, making the restoration process more difficult than it already was. But this pro restorer remained unfazed. He moved quickly to yank off the footrest and the exhaust pipe. From here, attention moved to the back, where another significant damage was spotted on the tire frame. Moving on, the restorer set out to remove the tire itself, and that's where things get really tricky. It took a while for the bolt to come off, and when it eventually did, he needed a bit of help to pull out the tire. Thankfully, someone was around to help out. With that sorted, it was time to focus on dismantling the engine. One by one, the components of the engine came off until the engine was completely detached. Finally, the rear tire, front fork, and other remaining components were disengaged, bringing the disassembly process to an end. Well, not exactly, because the wheels were yet to be skinned. But once that was done, the disassembly procedure came to a conclusive end. And now, it was time to start repairs. And where better to start off than the engine? The restorer starts by loosening out the components, and as you would expect from such a delicate restoration, he encountered a few challenges. First, he noticed a significant dent on the Kickstarter just as he was about to chop it off, and some bolts were so tight, the restorer required extra hands and tools to loosen them. That, though, was a small price to pay for the blockbuster outcome we're expecting at the end of this restoration. Next, it was time to mend the broken parts. This, of course, requires some scrapping, sandblasting, and polishing, all of which was done meticulously to avoid further damage. And I must say, the outcome was mind-blowing. All the components came out sparkling, almost like brand new. As you'd imagine, some of the components were damaged beyond repair, but thankfully the restorer was able to find the correct replacement for all of them. I mean, sourcing spare parts was one of the biggest fears for the restorer right from the start of the project, so now that he's been able to sort it out, he can heave a sigh of relief and proceed straight away to couple the engine. This took some time because, as you know, the engine is a collection of several moving and non-moving components, and each one had to be installed correctly to avoid issues at the end of the whole process. Anyway, some of the world's most important machinery was born during wartime, and the Jawa motorbike isn't any different. The history of this ultra-efficient two-wheel machine goes all the way back to the mid-90s, when Franciszek Janacek developed several designs and obtained over 60 patents during World War I. One of them was a lightweight and economical motorcycle that would serve the masses. But rather than starting from scratch, Janacek purchased the Wanderer motorcycle business after the war, and he renamed the company Jawa, inspired by the first two letters of Janacek and Wanderer. By 1933, Jawa's second-generation motorcycle model, the 175cc, had become famous in Czechoslovakia thanks to its performance, low weight, and durability. More than 3 decades later, in 1962, the company rolled out the Jawa 250cc, a more powerful model with a 4-speed transmission and a maximum power output of 15 horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute. Seen as a technological marvel at the time, the 250cc he paved the way for Jawa to enter the Indian automotive market. And in no time, it became a cult hero, appearing in several Bollywood movies like Chashme Budur and Suraksha. In fact, the brand's marketing catchphrase, "Forever Bike, Forever Value," still resonates with many Indians to this day. And every year, the National Jawa Day is celebrated annually to commemorate the power and legacy of the 175, 250, and 350cc Jawa bike. And that's why it's both shocking and disheartening to see this particular motorcycle languishing away in this sorry state. But then again, it only adds to the thrill and excitement of the restoration journey we're about to witness. Anyway, after a few hours of intricate and sensitive work, the engine was fully reassembled, but the restoration was far from done. The fuel tank and other components like the wheel, exhaust pipe, and frame still need attention. One after the other, these components were sandblasted and polished, and the ones that needed painting were given a special paint job. This whole process lasted for a sizable amount of minutes, and as you can imagine, the restorer would have been knackered from the strain of working all day. But at this point, there was no going back, especially when we were so close to completing the project. Plus, the outcome of the paint job was just wow. It's probably the most satisfying part of the whole project, and it just gives us that extra motivation to continue. Next on the agenda was to install new sets of tires. The restorer needed an extra hand for this one, but from here on, the reassembly process went smoothly. Well, that was until it was time to install the broken roller chain from earlier. Luckily, it was an easy fix, and the reassembly process continued. The fuel tank was installed, and guess what? The seat has been refurbished and fitted with new clothing. Finally, the fuel pump was connected, and all the components attached to the front fork were reinstalled. With this, it seemed like the restoration was done and we could test the bike, but sadly, that wasn't the case. Now, don't get me wrong. Aesthetically, the motorcycle was back to its best, and given the level of work that had been done already, we could say the motorcycle was ready to run. But the fact is, if you ignite it in this state, it won't run. And that's because it's missing two things: fuel and oil. Well, that's not really a big deal. All it took was a few minutes to refill both, and some last-minute artwork was done on strategic places, and the bike was ready to be unveiled. Now, we were pretty confident that everything that needed to be done had been done. All the components had been reassembled correctly. And if you compare the before and after picture, but with time, patience, and craftsmanship, the story isn't over. Restored to its former glory, the 1962 Jawa motorbike is reborn. Before we get to the big reveal, would you please subscribe and comment below? It really helps us a lot in making more videos like this. You could be tempted to believe that this is a brand new motorcycle, but we still couldn't say for sure that the restoration was complete because we don't know if the engine works or not. Well, there's only one way to find out. As the restorer approached the bike, my heart was racing fast, and you really cannot blame me. After these long hours of extensive repair work, it would be a disaster for the engine not to start at this point. As soon as the restorer slammed his feet on the Kickstarter, the engine roared to life. But the most exciting part was when the restorer took it for a test ride. It made for a satisfying watch, especially after seeing all the hard work required to transform this 62-year-old iconic bike from an abandoned relic to a functional and fascinating machine. With that said, what part of this restoration process really caught your attention? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to explore other restoration videos on the channel.